My name's Kerry Knott, and Todd has asked me to host this week's Digging Deeper message. I hope it's helpful for you. Let me start by asking you, what did you like in the message? Was there any particular part that made an impact on you more than others? What made you really, really think? Take some time and discuss that with your group. Next, what did you disagree with in the message? Was there anything that made you sit up and question what was said? When that happens, it's often a good time to step back and do a little self-assessment and say, what was it about that comment or that section that made me nervous or uncomfortable? Discuss that among yourselves. Now, what do you remember the most from the message? What will you take with you for the rest of the week and beyond? Was there something that really stuck with you that you can perhaps share with others that stuck that deeply? Now, part of the message today was on anger and how to handle anger. And, Todd asked me to think of, do I know an angry person? And without mentioning their name, I can think of one in particular who was a neighbor of ours when we lived in Virginia. He was an older gentleman, didn't have kids of his own. He hated the sound of kids playing loudly in the neighborhood. And there were a lot of kids around that part of the neighborhood. He would complain constantly, whether they were playing games in the street, whether they were jumping on the trampoline. And we did our best to just let him know these are kids being kids, but he just could not understand why they couldn't be quiet all day long when he was home, often by himself. We tried to reach out to him. He would even get angry when acorns that fell from our oak trees were blown into his driveway, and we offered to rake them and sweep them, and it always was a point of contention. It seemed like he was one of these people who he wasn't really happy unless he was angry. And there are people like that. I'm sure you may have someone in your life like that. Also, he and I had different points of view on politics, and he would always kind of attack me when people that I knew or was affiliated with did something, whether I agreed with it or not. And he just would always target me for those kind of contentious conversations. And I, by and large, stayed away from that because I didn't think it was helpful. He could be reached at times, and my wife made an effort often to reach him and talk to him, particularly about Jesus. We had him over for dinner several times. We would find calm moments to talk about him. He had a lot of issues going back to his childhood, and I don't know where he ended up. He passed away a couple of years ago, but I know he had the information to make a decision if he wanted. Even while he was in hospice, my wife sent flowers and some verses and some messages that challenged him to accept Jesus even at that late date. So anyway, he was someone who I would say was almost always angry, and it was a struggle. Now, Todd also asked if I would say if I struggle with anger, and that's something that you and your group could look at as well. And how does it look when you struggle with anger? Let me tell you one story about myself. When I was younger, I lived up in the DC area, and traffic was absolutely horrible. And I struggled with, I wouldn't say road rage, but I'd say road impatience, where a lot of aggressive, angry drivers were on the road all the time. And I would be trying to get ahead of them and trying to make sure they didn't cut me off. And it raised my blood pressure, and it wasn't helpful. And I could just sense it would just start my day off wrong. And one day I was praying, and I felt God just telling me, you know what? You be the guy that lets everybody else in. So I started trying it. And so when someone's trying to break in, I would let them in. I wouldn't try to break into other people unless I was really, really late. I would try to be patient. If someone's trying to get into my lane or pass, I would slow down and let them by. And just that simple thing I think it lowered my blood pressure. It has calmed me when I have to drive. And it was just a simple thing, but it was one way I would say that I was able to take something that could have led to maybe an accident or perhaps an altercation if something went wrong, to now I'm trying to just be the nice, gentle guy on the road, and it's made me better too, I think. So perhaps in your group, you can think about, do each of you know someone who's perpetually angry? And without mentioning their name, maybe try to figure out what's causing it and what you could do perhaps to help that person find an on-ramp from that kind of anger. And secondly, where do you struggle with anger? And who triggers your anger? Who sets it off? And think about ways you could diffuse those situations within yourself or with the people who cause that. Talk about it in your group. So now as we dig deeper into this lesson, and the verse is from Ephesians chapter 4, verses 25 through 32. I would encourage you to read it, and perhaps if you have different versions, different translations, read it in different ones to see how other translators treat this passage. And the question is, when the text says, should we be angry? Do you think this is a general anger or a specific type of anger? Now, before you discuss it with a group, I will give you my quick take on this. I think it's a general warning about the dangers of letting anger control you. There are different kinds of anger. But uncontrolled, impetuous, prideful anger can lead to all kinds of problems and also lead to sin. Tim Keller, one of my favorite theologians, said that anger could be like a powerful storm that can harm our health, relationships, and ability to make good decisions. It can create a tornado of problems, often hiding the real issues we're dealing with. We should never underestimate the damage that anger can cause. And you might, a good side research effort might be to look up all the verses about anger, plenty in Proverbs, some in Psalms, and many other places. And it often deals with anger and its consequences. So look those up, perhaps now or perhaps later as you dig a little bit deeper into this passage. Now, some of the different translations, New Living Translation focuses on, stop telling lies and then don't sin by letting anger control you. The English Standard Version says, be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger. And all of these say, give no opportunity to the devil. Give no foothold to the devil. The New King James Version says, be angry and do not sin, nor give place to the devil. They're all kind of getting at the same point. And it's not saying that anger itself is a sin. It's a kind of anger, and where it's focused, I believe, is the sin. Question 2 is, why does Paul say that we need to be careful about sinning when we are angry? Are anger and sin related? And if so, how? If you are angry at someone, you probably, or in some cases, you might feel a desire to hurt them, either physically or psychologically. That could be family members, could be those in your way at work, or if you're on the sports field, or even at the church. People get in your way and symbolically at least throw some elbows at times, and anger can rise up. But anger can lead to being out of control. And if you were to add alcohol or drugs to the mix, it can be way, way worse. So why does Paul say in verse 29, do not use foul or abusive language as part of this anger? Instead, he writes, let everything you say be good and helpful so that your words will be an encouragement to those who hear them. I think this is part of his way of talking about how to diffuse situations where anger may rise up or keep you from getting to that point in the first place. And that's so different than the way our modern world treats things these days. Think of Twitter or Facebook comments or other neighborhood social media apps where people tend to unload on each other and use awful language at times and foul language at times. And even, people are looking at, if you're unhinged, they think you're somehow more authentic. Or in politics, politicians have started using foul language to appear more in tune with the common person. That's a sad commentary on our culture if you have to use foul language to appeal to the common person. And at what do you typically get angry? Do you find yourself getting angry at sin as Jesus did and Paul advocated? Why or why not? Discuss that among your group. I personally, I get really angry at people who abuse others or make it easier to abuse others. And I'm thinking of child traffickers, drug dealers, pornographers. They get people trapped and then take advantage of them. And often these victims never get out of it. We even see it start on social media where kids are enticed to go in a direction that could lead them down a really terrible path. When I worked in one of my jobs with Comcast, we had a partnership with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and we would respond to their requests to do research on people who were getting their internet service through Comcast. And going through their training programs and seeing what they had to see and view every day, it's unbelievable how sick a lot of people are and how they use things to trap people. So I have a great anger toward those who are seeking to enslave these kids for money or other reasons. And I've looked for ways to help. I wish I could do more, and I will continue looking for ways I could be of some help in that situation. On another note, I get angry when my favorite sports team loses or is really messing up on the field, or they're losing to a team they should beat. Often my wife can hear me yelling at the TV. Just for the record, I'm an Auburn fan, so I have a lot to yell at usually. And that's just a silly anger that I hopefully I can confine to my living room, but I do get my blood pressure up when watching sporting events from time to time. Also, one of my kids can be quite obstinate at times, and when I try to be patient, but they don't listen, I can get angry. I've had to apologize many times for angry comments that I wish I hadn't said, but I suspect we all have done that at times, and I've really prayed, and God has taken much of that away. I'm still a work in progress when it comes to that. In some cases, I do get mad at the sin, but I have to admit, I often get mad just because of my selfish desires. So in your group, how do you get angry? How do you have the righteous anger as Paul talked about and Jesus demonstrated? Discuss this among your group. Another question is, how might unrighteous anger lead to the devil getting an opportunity? And you can discuss this among your group and come back, or you can hear my thoughts on it before you go to your group. Now, think of the types of situations or people who have had their lives significantly impacted because they lost control. And I think of how many husbands have hurt their wife or kids when they were angry. How many have lost relationships forever? How many people are in prison because they just couldn't let something go? They had to hit back. They had to right that wrong. They had to teach someone a lesson, and they just let their anger get out of control. I heard this week that a husband was so mad at his wife when they were going through a divorce and she was demanding sole custody that he drowned his kids, and he left a message to her saying, "If I can't have them, neither can you." That is just awful, awful anger. My father, when I was young, if ever he and my mom or any of us in the car got him angry, I would notice that his foot would get a little heavier on the gas pedal and our car would suddenly just start speeding up. And that was from when I was a little kid. Fortunately, nothing ever happened, but even something like that, reacting the wrong way in anger, could have led to something devastating to our family. Another way Satan can get a foothold is through the combination of anger and then drugs or alcohol or some situation that just inflames it. How many relationships, you probably know some who have been greatly affected by that combination. And one last thing on this subject, there can be an honor culture kind of issue here. And, Middle Eastern people, even in the South, I think there's a bit of this culture where you have to defend your honor if someone says something or does something, and that may mean striking out in a way that can cause harm or lead to very bad consequences for you and keeping you from your family. Those are the kinds of things that I think we need to ask God to control, help us control these angry thoughts and to look for ways to diffuse them. The last question is, how do we express anger at sin without directing it at people? Godly anger, I think Tim Keller said this, godly anger is like love protecting us from danger. Jesus used anger that way. A slow, controlled anger aimed at sin or sinful forces can be a force for good. Remember, one of God's character traits is slow to anger. You can find that in Psalm 145, and I believe God used that in revealing his character to Moses earlier. The Lord is gracious, full of compassion, slow to anger, and of great mercy. And when anger is about how something or someone affected me personally, and I want to respond forcefully, that is selfish or prideful anger. There's an element, even I think, of idolatry to that kind of anger. We want to be in control, not God. Ultimately, to control anger, we need the Holy Spirit to help us in this struggle. Without the Holy Spirit, we are going into battle unarmed. Remember the sermon series on putting on the full armor of God? You might also look up the fruit of the Spirit in Galatians chapter 5. When we are truly saved, we have the Holy Spirit in us. The Holy Spirit will give us, in increasing quantity over time, the fruit of the Spirit. Maybe someone in the group can look that up and go through those the aspects of the fruit of the Spirit. So how do we control anger? The best way is by letting the Holy Spirit lead us and by seeking to gain God's wisdom to know how to live more and more each day like Jesus.